The orange smelled like home. Nora Hale had carried 3 of them in her bag from Earth, wrapped in a cloth, the way her father used to pack them for long trips into the bush. She sat at the small table in the mess hall of the Orith crossing and peeled the first one slowly, working the blade of her old fixed knife under the skin in one careful strip. Across the table, Drayle watched her with all 4 of his forward eyes. He was tall, even sitting. His exoskeleton was a dark green-brown, and the bioluminescent lines along his arms glowed a soft blue when he was calm, which he usually was. He had been studying humans for 2 years. He had filed over 400 observation reports, and he still did not understand the knife. "You use that tool only for food preparation," he said. His translator produced the words in flat, even tones. "And other things," Nora said. "What other things?" She thought about it. Cutting rope, scraping ice off a gear latch, digging out a splinter once, opening a stuck crate lid. She turned the orange in her hand. "A lot of things." Drayle recorded this in his small device. "On your planet, yes. But you're not on your planet." "No," she agreed. "But the knife is still useful." He studied her for a moment. "You are not military." "No." "You are not a scientist." "Also no." "Then why are you here?" Nora set down the orange and looked at him directly. It was something that made many Veruan uncomfortable. Direct eye contact was considered aggressive in their culture. Drayle had learned to tolerate it from humans, though it still registered somewhere in his instincts as a challenge. "I spent 15 years taking people into the wilderness," she said. "Places where things could kill you and nobody was coming to help. The Space Corps said that was useful experience for a joint mission." She picked up the orange again. "I think they mostly wanted someone who wouldn't panic if something went wrong." "Has something gone wrong yet?" "Not yet." The Orith crossing was 3 weeks into its mission. It was a joint vessel, half human crew, half Veruan research team, meant to operate in neutral space and produce a shared record of cooperation between their 2 species. Politically, it was important. Day to day, it was mostly awkward. The humans found the Veruan too quiet. The Veruan found the humans too loud. The food was kept strictly separate after an incident in the first week involving a human spice blend that had temporarily disrupted a Veruan crew member's sensory organs. Nobody had been seriously hurt, but the memory lingered. Nora had adapted better than most. She did not need the environment to be comfortable. She needed it to be legible. She needed to understand its patterns and rhythms well enough to know when something was off. That was a skill she had built over years of reading weather and terrain and the particular silence that falls before something dangerous moves. She had been reading this ship for 3 weeks. She knew where the Veruan crew gathered in the evenings. She knew the sound of the maintenance cycles and the ventilation shifts. She knew which corridor lights flickered before they died and which panels hummed differently when the pressure was up. And she had noticed, over the past 4 days, that Commandant Soru and his unit of 6 Veruan military observers had been moving through corridors they had no research reason to be in. She mentioned this to Drayle while she separated the orange into sections. He was quiet for a moment. "Commandant Soru is a senior official. His movements are his own business." "I know," she said. "I'm just telling you what I saw. Do you believe there is a threat?" She considered this carefully. She did not want to be dramatic. She also had not survived 15 winters in the Yukon by ignoring small things that felt wrong. "I believe something is being prepared," she said. "I don't know what. I might be completely wrong." Drayle's luminescent lines dimmed slightly, a Veruan expression she had come to associate with discomfort. "I will note your observation," he said, in a tone that meant he would not. Nora ate a section of the orange. It was slightly dry, 3 weeks in a bag, but it still tasted like something real. She had offered a piece to Drayle on the first day. He had declined politely and then spent 10 minutes recording how she chewed. She had found this funny. He had found her finding it funny to be another data point. They had settled into a strange, comfortable rhythm since then. He asked questions. She answered honestly. He recorded things she said that she did not think were interesting. She watched him carefully, not because she distrusted him, but because watching carefully was simply what she did. He was, she had decided, a genuinely good person, or whatever the Veruan equivalent of a good person was. Curious, careful, not cruel. She hoped she was wrong about Soru. She tucked the knife back into its sheath and folded the orange peel into a square on the table. The alert tone rang. It was not the maintenance tone or the shift change tone. It was the general ship tone, the one that meant everyone should stop and listen. Captain Yura's voice came over the intercom, steady and professional. All crew, this is the captain. Please remain at your current stations. We are experiencing a situation on the command deck. The intercom cut out. The mess hall went very still. Nora's hand moved to the knife on her belt. Not to draw it, just to confirm it was there. It was. The silence after the intercom cut out had a texture to it. Nora had heard many kinds of silence in her life. The silence of a forest before a storm. The silence of a mountain at 3 in the morning when your shelter is failing and you have to decide what to do next. The silence of a situation that has just changed and has not yet shown you how bad the change is. This was that last kind. Drayle rose from his seat. His bioluminescent lines had shifted from blue to a dim, anxious amber. He moved toward the mess hall door. Nora was already there ahead of him, pressing her palm flat against it instead of hitting the open panel. "Wait," she said. He stopped. She stood still for 3 seconds, listening. The ship's background hum was the same. The ventilation was the same. But somewhere 2 corridors over, she could hear the specific heavy footfall of Veruan soldiers in gear. Not the quiet shuffle of researchers. Something deliberate and spaced, a patrol pattern. She stepped back from the door. "Don't go out there." "What is happening?" "I think Commandant Soru just took the command deck." Drayle's amber lines flickered. "That is not. He would not. He did." She said it simply, without drama, because drama was not useful. 6 soldiers. They've been positioning for 4 days. The captain's mic cut mid-sentence. That's not a system failure. She moved to the back of the mess hall and looked at the maintenance panel on the wall. "We need to get out of this room before they sweep it." "Sweep it." "Check each compartment. Make sure people are where they're supposed to be." She pulled the panel open. Behind it was a narrow crawlway used for ventilation service. "Just wide enough." "Come on." Drayle looked at the crawlway with visible doubt. He was significantly larger than a human. He looked back at Nora. She was already inside. He followed, with difficulty. They moved through the crawlway for 4 minutes in the dark, Nora ahead, one hand on the smooth inner wall, counting junctions from memory. She had walked the accessible corridors of this ship long enough to have a rough map in her head. She also knew which maintenance routes connected where because on the second day, she had read every refit document she could find out of habit, the same way she read topographic maps before entering new terrain. She stopped at a junction and listened. Nothing moving nearby. She opened a second panel and helped Drayle out into a service corridor in the ship's lower section. He stood up slowly, his exoskeleton catching the low corridor light. His lines were still amber. "Are you hurt?" she asked. "No," he said. "I am processing." "Take your time." She moved to the wall comm panel and checked if internal comms were still live. They were. Soru had locked down external communications, but the internal network was still running, probably so his people could coordinate. She kept her voice low. "Drayle, I need the ship's internal layout from your research files. Every room, every junction, every route between here and the pod bay." He stared at her. "You are going to do something?" "Yes." "Nora, these are military personnel." "I know. You are a wilderness guide." "I know that too." She looked at him directly. "I'm not going to fight them. I don't need to fight them. I just need to know where they are and where they're not." She kept her voice calm and even. "Drayle, the files." He was quiet for a moment. Then something in him settled. She could see it in the way his posture changed, a subtle shift, and he pulled out his research device and began moving through the ship schematics. She listened to his quiet voice, guiding her through the layout, and began to move the information into the map she was building in her head. Exits, junctions, choke points, blind spots. The same process she had used 100 times in 100 difficult places, except the terrain was a starship and the weather was politics. In the command deck above them, Commandant Soru was speaking to his unit with the quiet confidence of a man executing a plan that had been carefully designed. He had 6 trained soldiers. He had the captain and 3 crew members as leverage. He had control of external communications. He had every reason to believe this would proceed exactly as planned. His assessment of humans, drawn from Veroan military intelligence reports, was clinical, low individual physical threat, high psychological vulnerability under duress, likely to comply when isolated and overwhelmed. The report recommended limiting their movement, controlling their communications, and allowing the natural fear response to do most of the work. The report did not include a section on wilderness survival guides. It did not describe what a person looks like when they have already made peace with the possibility that things might go badly and decided to move anyway. Soru expected compliance. He was patient. He would wait. In the service corridor 2 levels below, Nora Hale studied the schematic on Drail's screen, memorized the junction she needed, and started walking. Her hand did not go to the knife. There was no need yet, but she knew it was there, and knowing it was there was the same as knowing she had options, and knowing she had options was the same as knowing she was not finished. She was not finished. The soldier was standing with his back to the corridor junction, watching the door to Storage Bay 4. Nora saw him from 12 meters away, in the low amber light of the service passage. He was large. All Veroan soldiers were large, with body armor over his natural exoskeleton and a restraint tool on his side. He had not heard her. She moved quietly, the same way she moved in dense bush, heel to toe, weight distributed. She stopped. She did not reach for the knife as a weapon. She had no intention of attacking a soldier in body armor with a fruit knife. That was not a plan. That was a way to get hurt and leave everyone worse off. What she needed from this moment was not a fight. What she needed was a gap. A 3-second gap in which the soldier was confused instead of alert, and she could move through that gap and do what needed doing. She thought for 2 seconds. Then she stepped out into the open. She held the knife up clearly, blade pointing down, handle forward, the way you hold something when you want to show it is not a threat. She spoke in broken Veroan. She had learned maybe 40 words in 3 weeks, which was 40 more than most of the human crew. "Excuse," she said. "You hungry? I have fruit." She tilted the knife slightly. "I can show you how we do this." The soldier turned fully, his forward eyes fixed on her, then on the knife, then on her face. He did not understand what he was looking at. She counted. 1. His hand moved toward his restraint tool, not quickly, but starting to move. 2. She was already stepping sideways, away from him, toward the corridor junction panel. Not running, walking, like someone who had said the wrong thing and was now embarrassed. 3. She jammed the multi-tool from her belt into the junction panel's maintenance slot, toggled the manual lock, and sealed the corridor segment. The door between them clicked shut. She heard him hit once hard. Then the sound of him speaking into his comm, she was already moving away from the door. She had not heard him. She had not needed to. He was contained in a sealed corridor segment with no access to the route she needed. He would be found and released within the hour. That was fine. She only needed the hour. Drail's voice came through her earpiece, very quiet. "I saw that on the internal feed." A pause. "What were you doing?" "Buying time. You offered him fruit. I needed him to stop and think." People, beings, stop and think when something doesn't make sense. I gave him something that didn't make sense. Another pause. "That is, I don't have a category for that. Keep watching the feeds. Tell me if anyone is moving toward Junction 7. She moved fast now, heading deeper into the lower section. The ship's schematics were clear in her head. She needed to reach Engineering Bay 2, which connected to a secondary route she had identified as the one the soldiers had not positioned anyone near, because it appeared on the official floor plan as a sealed equipment room, and on the refit documents as a through passage that the human engineering team had opened during the refit and then quietly never reported. It was not on any Veroan intelligence assessment of the ship. She found Fun at the bay entrance. He was young. She had spoken to him twice before in the common area. He was one of Drail's research assistants, barely past the Veroan equivalent of 20, and he had made it clear on both occasions that he found humans fascinating in a way that his colleagues considered slightly embarrassing. He had refused to join Soru's faction when the soldiers had quietly offered Veroan crew members a chance to step aside and cooperate. He was now sitting on the floor with his back against the bay door, his bioluminescent lines cycling between amber and a distressed pale white. "Fun," she said. He looked up. His lines settled slightly at the sight of her. She registered this and filed it as useful. "You are alive," he said. "Yes." "Are you hurt?" "No. I locked myself in. I did not know what else to do." "That was exactly right." She looked at him steadily. "I need your help now. I can't move through this part of the ship without someone who can read the Veruin system controls. I can get us where we need to go, but when we get there, you'll need to work the panel." He looked at her for a moment. His lines were still cycling. "What are we going to do?" he asked. She handed him a wrench from the wall rack. He stared at it. "We're going to cut Soru off from the one thing he needs to keep control," she said. "And we're going to do it before he realizes we're moving." She looked at him directly. "The only direction that matters right now is forward. Can you do that?" Finn held the wrench. He looked at it. Then he stood up. "Forward," he said. From the command deck, a broadcast came over the ship's internal system. Commandant Soru's voice, calm and formal. "Attention. I will begin removing human crew members via escape pod in 40 minutes unless the cooperation treaty is declared void. One at a time. This will continue until compliance is confirmed." He expected silence. Compliance. Humans breaking under pressure. He was still wrong. 40 minutes. Nora counted it the same way she counted fuel and food on a long trip. Not with panic, but with the clean, flat arithmetic of what was possible in the time available. She had been in tighter situations. Once, a rock slide had sealed her and 2 clients into a valley with no radio signal and 1 day of food. They had walked out in 3 days. You did not do that by thinking about how bad it was. You did it by asking what was actually in front of you and what could be done with it. She ran through what she had. 1 knife, 1 multi-tool, 1 frightened but willing young Veruin who knew the ship's control systems. A maintenance route that was not on any official schematic. And 30 years of habit that told her the most dangerous terrain was always the terrain you had not been given a map for. Soru had been given a map. A thorough one. Veruin military intelligence had prepared detailed layouts of the Orth crossing before the mission. They had studied the ship's systems, the crew roster, the human behavioral profiles. They had done their work carefully. What they had not studied was the ship after the humans moved in. Nora had read the refit documents in her first 2 days because she read every document available in any new environment out of habit, so old she no longer thought of it as a habit. In those documents, she had found 17 modifications made by the human engineering team during the 6-month refit. 12 were mundane. 3 were minor structural changes. 1 was a secondary atmospheric feed junction added to bypass the original routing, which the engineers had considered inefficient. And 1 was a crawlway connecting 2 areas that the original plan showed as separate sealed compartments, added by a junior engineer for convenience and never formally reported, because paperwork in a 6-month refit has a way of getting lost. Soru's intelligence had the original plans, not the refit documents, not the crawlway, not the atmospheric junction. Nora moved through the crawlway with Finn close behind her, his larger frame making it difficult but not impossible. She counted junctions. 3rd left, 2nd right, up 4 meters. The crawlway smelled of dust and old sealant, and was just tall enough to move through at a crouch. She stopped at a grated access port and looked through it. The life support junction room. Empty. She opened the port and dropped into the room. Finn followed, landing harder, his exoskeletal joints clicking against the floor. The junction room was a cluster of conduits, flow regulators, and distribution panels that managed atmosphere pressure and air mix throughout the ship. It was critical infrastructure. Soru's soldiers had not posted anyone here because the official schematics showed only one access route to this room, and that route had a guard on it. Not this route. Finn moved to the main panel and studied the controls. His lines had stabilized to a focused green-white. Whatever he had been feeling earlier, he was present now. "I need the atmospheric feed to the command deck," Nora said quietly. "Not cut off, just reduced. Slow. Maybe 8% over 30 minutes. He looked at her. "That will not incapacitate them." "I know. 8% pressure reduction at this altitude equivalent means reduced oxygen saturation over time. They won't feel it happen." Their reaction time slows. Their thinking gets a little cloudy. High altitude does the same thing. She had seen it many times, clients on high mountain approaches who became slower and less decisive without knowing why. I don't need them unconscious. I just need them 2 seconds slower than they think they are. Fun understood. He worked the panel. While he did, Drail's voice came quietly through the earpiece. Nora, Soru is moving Captain Yura toward the pod bay. He has moved up his schedule. I believe he intends to demonstrate commitment. 28 minutes, then. Maybe less. Which route to the pod bay from here? She asked Drail. He walked her through it. She mapped it against what she already knew. There was one point where she would have to cross an open corridor with sight lines to a guard position. She studied the timing in her head. It was possible. Tight, but possible. Fun finished at the panel and stepped back. Done. The drift will begin now. Good. Come on. He followed her without hesitation this time. The wrench was still in his hand. He had not questioned why he was still holding it. He had simply held it, the way you hold on to something when you're not sure what will be needed and want to be ready. Drail was watching the feeds. In the command deck above, Soru was speaking to one of his soldiers with the easy authority of a man who had seen his plan work exactly as predicted. He did not know about the crawlway. He did not know about the atmospheric drift. He did not know about the junior engineer's unofficial modification or the wilderness guide moving through it. His intelligence report had described humans as psychologically fragile under threat. It had described the fear response. It had modeled how they would behave. It had not described what happens when a person has already decided that fear is just noise, and the only question is what comes next. Nora moved toward the pod bay. The pod bay's secondary maintenance hatch was behind a coolant conduit rack that made it invisible from the main entrance. It was small, sized for a human, which was probably why no one else had thought about it, and it opened with a standard hex key that Nora had on her multi-tool. She told Fun to stay at the hatch with instructions to seal it closed and lock the corridor behind her if things went wrong. She did not explain what things going wrong looked like. He understood anyway. She went in alone. The pod bay was a long room with 8 pods in 2 rows and an equipment storage area at the far end. The main bay lights were on. She could see Captain Yura standing near pod 3 with her hands bound in front of her. 2 Veruan soldiers guarded the bay, one near the main door, one near the pods. Both were standing still. They were also, she noted, moving their weight slightly from foot to foot in a way that suggested something was not right with how they felt. The atmospheric drift was reaching this section. Not enough to notice, just enough to make the world feel a little heavier. She had 2 minutes before Sora's scheduled call for the first pod launch. She knew this because Drail had told her, voice barely above a breath in her ear 30 seconds ago. She did not plan this the way a soldier plans an operation. She planned it the way she planned a river crossing. You look at what is moving, you look at what is still, you pick the line, and then you commit. You do not stop halfway across a river. She moved out from behind the conduit rack and walked toward the pods. The soldier near the pods saw her first. He was slow to react, just slightly, just enough. He raised a hand and spoke a command. She did not understand the words. She understood the tone. She held up both hands. Her expression did not change. She said, in flat Veruan, I am looking for the captain. I was told to come here. It was nonsense as a story. It did not need to be a good story. It needed to be a confusing one for 2 seconds. The soldier near the main door turned toward her. The soldier near the pods stepped forward. Captain Yura, who had been standing still and watching, understood immediately. Not from any signal, but from the specific quality of Nora's calm. And she shifted her weight slightly, putting herself between the pod door and the guard. The guard near the door was now looking at Yura instead of Nora. Nora moved. She did not run. She closed the distance to the pod side guard in fast, quiet steps, brought her elbow up against his forearm before he could close his grip, and used the moment of contact to push past him and reach Captain Yura's restraints. One cut. The blade was sharp, and the restraints were single band. Yura's hands came free. The guard grabbed for Nora. He was slow. Not much, just enough. She was already moving sideways, putting the pod structure between her and his grip. Yura moved the other way. The guard near the main door was coming now. Nora pulled the pod bay's manual interior seal, a red handle on the wall that she had identified from the refit documents as an emergency lockdown for radiation events, and slammed it down. Every door in the bay sealed from the inside with a deep magnetic thud. Both guards stopped. The main door was sealed. The secondary hatch she had come through was sealed from Fun's side. The guards were not trapped. They could override in minutes, but they were paused, assessing the new situation. That was enough. Storage rack. Back left corner, Yura said quietly. She had been in this bay before as part of Captain's familiarization. She moved there and pulled a panel open. Behind it were two of the other 3 crew members who had been taken, both unbound and waiting in the equipment storage space behind a false front panel that Yura had apparently had the presence of mind to organize before Nora arrived. Within 90 seconds, all 3 crew members were out of the storage space and moving toward the secondary hatch. The last thing Nora did before she went through the hatch was walk to a flat equipment crate near the center of the room, set her knife on it, blade down, and step back from it with both hands raised. She looked directly at the surveillance camera mounted in the corner of the bay, the one she knew was feeding to the command deck to Soru's personal monitor. She held the position for 3 seconds. Hands up, knife on the table. No threat, no surrender either. Something else, an offer. Then she stepped through the hatch. Fun sealed it behind her. Drail's voice, quiet and a little shaken, came through the earpiece. He is watching. Soru is watching the feed. Good, Nora said. What were you doing? She moved down the corridor, the freed crew members ahead of her. Telling him the next part is talking, she said. Open a comm channel. I think it's time to finish this. Soru stood down 40 minutes later. He did not do it gracefully. He did it the way a military man stands down when the math no longer works. Without excuses, without theater, just the clean acknowledgement of a position that is no longer tenable. His hostages were free. His soldiers were contained or compromised. The command deck crew, recovering from the atmospheric drift, had retaken their posts. He had no more leverage. The negotiation, conducted over ship comms with Drail translating, lasted 9 minutes. Nora said 4 sentences. The rest was Soru arranging terms that let him preserve some portion of his standing, which she had no interest in taking from him. She needed the ship secured. She did not need him humiliated. That was its own kind of message, though she did not think of it that way at the time. The Veruan political faction that had ordered the operation lost what they were after. The cooperation agreement held. An inquiry was opened. Soru was quietly removed from active command and placed under review. These were facts that emerged over the following weeks, after the Orth crossing had reached port and delivered its crew safely, and the reports had been filed, and people had begun to understand what had actually happened. What had actually happened took some time to explain. Veruan military intelligence spent 3 weeks on the incident review. They had expected to write a report about a security failure, a gap in the patrol rotation, perhaps, or a communications vulnerability. What they produced instead was something that circulated quietly and then widely through Veruan defense channels, forwarded with commentary, and then forwarded again. The report contained a section on the knife. Not because the knife had done anything remarkable. The knife had cut one restraint band and been placed gently on a crate. The section existed because the review analysts could not account for the knife in any of their existing frameworks. It was not a weapon. It was not a threat. It was just there at the center of every phase of the incident, carried by a woman who had used it to peel fruit and seal a door panel and communicate something wordless through a surveillance camera. The note in the margin of the final report was added by the senior analyst. It said, simply, do not mistake the knife. The knife is not the point. Drail requested a formal interview with Nora before they reached port. He had filed over 400 reports in 2 years. He had documented tool use and social behavior and dietary habits and communication patterns. He had been thorough and careful and, by his own internal measure, fairly good at his work. He had not seen anything like the past 20 hours. He needed to understand it, if he could. They sat at the same mess hall table where the whole thing had started. Nora had the second orange. She had been saving it. He asked her to walk him through each phase. She did, plainly, without drama. He recorded it. When she finished, he sat with his device closed for a moment. "Were you afraid?" he asked. "Yes," she said. She did not make it sound like a complex answer, because it was not. "How did you continue?" She thought about this. She wanted to give him an honest answer, not a useful one. "Fear is loudest in the first moment," she said. "After the first moment, the next one is always quieter. So I just try to get to the next one." Every time, Drayle was quiet. Then he said, "In Vero and psychology, there is a concept. It is very old. It describes the capacity to act when everything inside you is resisting action, not because you feel no resistance, but because you move anyway. We consider it the rarest quality a being can have." He paused. The word translates, roughly, as the one who walks through the noise. Nora looked at him. "That's a good phrase. I have studied humans for 2 years," he said. "I have tried to understand what makes your species different. Not your technology, not your biology. Something else. Something that I kept observing but could not name." He folded his hands on the table. "I believe I can name it now." "What is it?" "You practice surviving, not as training, as a way of living. You accumulate small difficult things and you do them anyway. And every time you do, the next difficult thing is a little less impossible." He looked at her steadily. "Most species, when threatened, respond with the resources they have in that moment. You respond with everything you have ever survived. That is not the same thing." Nora set the orange peel down in a neat pile. She did not say that he was right or wrong. She just sat with the idea for a moment, the way she sat with terrain she was about to enter, looking at it, taking it seriously, not rushing. Then she picked up the knife and started peeling the orange. Drayle watched. His bioluminescent lines were blue. The calm color, the one she had come to associate with him being, in whatever way a Veruan could be, at ease. He did not record this moment. Some things, he had decided, did not belong in a report.